Welcome to this week's Harness Racing Alumni Show. I'm Freddie Hudson, and I'm here today with Trade Martin, Bob Marks, and Andy Cohen.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show with your hosts, Freddie Hudson and Trade Martin.
On this week's show, we have assembled an international panel to discuss harness racing. The panel consists of international owner and breeder Gordon Banks, Hall of Fame driver and the CEO of the Hambletonian Society, John Campbell. From Canada, we have Thoroughbred and standardbred owner and breeder, the former CEO of Woodbine Entertainment, Clay Horner. From Australia, trainer, driver, owner, the co-host of Trot Vision, and the vice president of the Victorian Trainer and Drivers Association, Steve Cleave. And from New Zealand, standardbred owner and breeder, Robert Famularo. Welcome to the Harness Racing Alumni Show, gentlemen.
Thank you, Freddie.
Good. It's great to be here.
Now, Gordon is going to be conducting this, and so I'm switching over to Gordon for him to take over.
Well, I appreciate that, and I wanted to thank everybody for participating, and I have a feeling it might be a little difficult to speak with 6 people on this call at the same time, but we could try. Just to set the stage a little bit, I think the best we can do is try to see if we can, between us, come up with some ideas that can lead to something that moves the industry forward, because it's certainly in a lot of difficulty and at a turning point down under and here in the States. I don't want to set too much of a stage. I want everybody to say whatever it is that they think could be relevant and helpful. And with that, I think I should really open it up. I could say that for me, what I see in the States is a real problem in that you have an industry that doesn't own its product, which really can't make use of its product, which is simulcasting. It has ownership of casinos that wants its demise. It has a product that deteriorated, and it doesn't really own assets that enable the business to succeed, and has no capability of immediate profitability or even medium-term profitability because of the limited amount of money that it can make on direct racing. So with that, and you have an organization in the USGA that hasn't yet been effective. So it leads to the question of what can North America do to salvage harness racing and to move it forward, given those set of facts. And then in Australia, especially where Stephen is, you have a major problem in Victoria where they've lost a fortune, and that's a major point of discussion. And in New Zealand, Robert's going to be able to discuss better the situation there, which is probably more hopeful than all the other jurisdictions, but has its issues as well. So with that, I think I sort of have to open it up to everybody and see where it goes. I think the industry needs this discussion, and there shouldn't be any restrictions on it.
Gordon, it's Clay. I'll just have one observation to start off from my perspective, and maybe people can think about this in terms of whether it resonates with them or not. I'm looking at not specifically Canada, although Woodbine qualifies sort of on the fringes of this. But if I look at the U.S. racing scene and look at the organizations that are successful and have a prospect of being successful, and this is completely consistent with your comment to begin with. So who are they? They're Churchill, which owns its product. There's Stronach, which owns its product but doesn't want to be in the business. There's Naira, and in particular with a crown jewel like Saratoga and the new Belmont, which is a not-for-profit organization, so committed only to the business and with enough scale to own their distribution or control their distribution. And then you have Keeneland on a smaller scale running an elite boutique business, but again, one that everybody has to have and take. So my biggest observation from a business point of view would be to succeed in the long run, it requires that the principal players in the business are people that have an elite quality product and own their own distribution, hopefully with multi assets to sell. Woodbine's fortunate in that regard, and that has both the standardbred and the thoroughbred business. But personally, I think the future of tracks that are solo organizations or operations or loose amalgamation of tracks that are owned by casinos, I would just venture to everybody that within 10 years, all of those will be gone. So the alternative is, what can we do and build out of 3 or 4 organizations that have enough prestige, quality of product, and control enough of their distribution to possibly make it in the long term.
Well, all I can say is I agree 100%. But I think everybody else has to you gave them a big mouthful. You and I sometimes discuss these things, John, but I think that's, what does everybody think about that? What do you think, Clyde?
That was Clay who said that.
I'm sorry, what do you think, John?
Well, I don't disagree. And the problem we have is any kind of consensus or unity within the game. In my opinion, we don't have a very good business model, and we can't get a unified voice or agreement to change it. We're overexposed. We have tracks that are racing too much. The public has made it clear they want competitive racing with big fields, and we go out of our way not to give them that. And I don't know what the time frame is for that, but there's certainly a finite number at the end of the line here if we don't change our business model in regards to dates, the quality of the fields, the size of the fields, because that's what the public wants.
Yeah, Freddie here. I agree with you, John, 100%. We need to start mixing it up a little bit and make the product more attractive. And then once we have the product more attractive, we can start marketing it.
Yes, but then, we still have that problem that of the percentage of the bets that's bet off track now, and the tracks get such a small percent of that. And let's be honest, people are not coming back to the track except on our big events, and that's why we have to put all our effort and resources into making our big events the best they possibly can and expose people in that way. So we still have the problem with the majority of the bets coming in from off track, and the small percent of what the tracks and the horsemen gain from that.
And you're exactly right on that, John. And the problem or the issue to solve is a lot of that is due to the casino companies not having any real interest in it being different from that. And so if you were, to look in a grand way, if you said, okay, let's put together an amalgam of Woodbine, the Meadowlands, the Red Mile when they race, maybe Ohio, although they're tied up with a casino company, and think about whether there's another product that could be a quality product, and say these tracks need to come together as one organization for betting purposes, and coordinate their schedules, coordinate their race programs, coordinate the sharing of big races, and most importantly, do everything they can to have it be our casino, our pari-mutuel network that is going to get the majority of the betting or enough of the betting. So instead of it being 3% at the end of the day, it's never going to go back to being 20. But could we put together that amalgam of players and have enough product, of a quality product, to allow the tracks to get 12%?
Yeah, Clay, I think that's the key. I think otherwise you're stuck in a situation where the tracks cannot possibly make money. And how a business that can't make money on its direct product can succeed over time and live over time, I don't see it. You know, and the other thing I think is I wonder if one can try to develop a sort of a win-win-win situation between the governments, the casinos, and racing, whereby over a period of 5 or 10 years, one's transitioning to a situation where racing is owned by people that want racing to succeed. And the casinos clearly want us out. They're going to do everything they can to push for decoupling. It's inevitable that it's going to come. What if we work with the casinos in the States to let them, at some point, 7, 10 years out, be released from the connection with racing? And in the meantime, what they have to do is move the racing to some sort of much less expensive geographical location in whatever state or province one's in.
Well,
give that asset.
It's
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
that. I think there's another gem of an idea in there, because I think the other long-term threat to racing is the governments will say, you know, particularly in an era where governments are being, you know, cut down or you know, being required to have less operating tenants. Racing's a very easy place for state governments to look at it and say, well, if we're going to do what the federal government in the U.S. is doing, you know, let's start. We'll cut the racing money by half. But if we could go to the states and Ontario in Canada and say, we collectively can do over time with less government money, but we need this transition period, and we need you to be resolute partners of ours in doing that. And part of that is the legislative piece of how we're going to let the casino companies partially off the hook, maybe totally off the hook over time. And we do not have enough negotiating leverage as tracks and horse people to do that. But you do, because they're completely subject to your jurisdiction in that regard. And collectively, coming back to the point, we want to fashion a win-win-win that allows them to get out of what they don't want to do, allow you, government, to ultimately have to put in less collective money, but also gives us the time to chart our own destiny doing this together.
Again, 100% what I think. I'm sorry.
If I can jump in there, exactly what you're saying right now is what we are experiencing in Victoria here in Australia. Is we did have time. It wasn't used up properly. Our government basically is broke, and they come to us and they said a few years ago that we need to start living within our means. And unfortunately, when the government's throwing you lots of grants and everything else, you think it's going to continue on. You know, Daddy's credit card's never going to run out, and the government have basically cut that credit card off from Victoria this year, and we've had massive cuts, and we have no future fund. So we've got nothing to fall back on unless we can organise a deal to sell some land or whatever else. But what you're just saying about having enough time to transition, get yourself into the right position so you do have a future fund to set yourself up going forward and not run into the brick wall that we've run into in Victoria. We're running for stake money now that's lower than what we were racing for back in 2013. You know, we're talking 12 or 13 years ago, we were racing for more money, and it's getting extremely hard to survive down here. There's other states in Australia that are actually doing quite well. So it's not just Australian racing. It's really directed at Victoria, and that's because we were one of the strongest states and we had so much government support. And as soon as that got taken away, we realised we just had nothing built up underneath that government support.
Yeah. But New South Wales, which is very successful, is successful largely because they sold Harold Park for about $200 million or $150 million. And they've been able to subsidize based on that and the income from that. And that's what I was thinking, too, to what Clay and I were both discussing, that if it's a win-win, at the end of the day, you want racing to not only have ownership that wants racing to succeed, but you want it to have an underlying real estate asset. And if one can broker a deal where the casinos cooperate in getting racing that underlying land asset in a very inexpensive area that's well chosen, that perhaps in 10 years is worth an awful lot more, it's another backstop for racing. Not just the funding, but the land that it gives racing. There's so many things that can be done, but it requires cooperation between the legislature, state government, the ownership of the casino ownership and racing. And to me, the biggest problem is how and who represents racing. How does one move it from? How do you effectuate, Clay, the vision you have? Who would do it?
Well, I think what you do is put together a group of I'll call it the CEOs that are invested in racing, together with John and the Hambletonian Society, and maybe I'd suggest a couple of other people who are just fantastically successful business thinkers. So we get more than just our shared history, but we get people who have transformed other industries to work with us in thinking about the way you transform an industry, and we go at that collectively. I mean, again, another incredible example of what you're talking about in terms of saying, capitalize on the value of our real estate and move to a place where we can get the distribution, but at not in a situation where you have to own the land, is Kentucky Downs. I mean, obviously it's a very short meet, but the purses are astronomical, and by definition that means that every wagering facility has to carry that product as the top product of the time. And that would be part of all of that, together with getting the governments to invest in it at the outset, and coming up with, again, a reasonable schedule of when our races are going to be on, so we maximize the opportunities for the tracks that are in rotation at any particular time. I'll say probably the biggest thing I've learned during my short time as a thoroughbred owner, when I've been lucky enough to own a couple of great parts of great horse, is one of the great assets the thoroughbred business has, and I'm thinking about Australia and New Zealand in this regard, is the truly international nature of the racing. So I look at it, and someone would say to me, how has your viewership of racing changed from the way it was 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago? I look at it and say, okay, I watch most of my racing on the weekend, but in the summer, a large part of that is watching the English, Irish, and French thoroughbred racing for my thoroughbred content, maybe a little bit of Saratoga. But I would say, just myself, one of the great observations I have of European harness racing and Australasia harness racing is the big fields that you have, because again, if we're going to be a competitive long-term product, we have to have 12 horses on the racetrack, and because for the reasons we all know. But again, we know that means we have to have the purses that make that work for the guys and women that own those horses. But a part of it that I think we could do better at is incorporating Australasia racing into the North American calendar and educating our clients about that, and vice versa, and maybe a little of it from France. I mean, I historically watched the Prix d'Amérique every year. That'd be the only race I'd watch, and I still don't watch a great deal. But I can tell you, I just marvel when I watch a race at Vincennes, an overnight race where there are 15 trotters and they trot 3 wide the whole way. I mean, let's face it, it's 10 times more interesting.
That's true.
Is it interesting or is it puntable?
And puntable. I mean, in business terms, puntable, more importantly, but it's also interesting.
But one of the difficulties there, Steve, I also have thought for a long time there should be much more Australian racing here, and one of the former heads of Victorian Racing, and we were trying to work together on introducing it here in the States in an intelligent fashion where where programs would be available to North Americans in a fashion that we could understand. Because most Americans, if they look at your form, wouldn't know what they're looking at. So if you're going to have a product designed for the U.S. market, it has to be intelligently designed with proper commentary, with right programs. But if it were done well, it would also be a tremendous financial asset to Victoria. And yet they never do it.
Yeah, 100% agreed. I know they did it in COVID times. We had some morning meets where we were sending out the broadcast to America, and we've also had some late trot meets where we were broadcasting into Europe as well. But I agree. If I look at your cards, I sit there and go, well, I don't know what I'm looking at, sort of thing. So it's something where if you are going to beam your product into another country, you have to give them an A1 product that they can bet confidently into and understand exactly what they're looking at.
Because
it's reciprocal.
I'll make an observation. The race, the final race of the drivers' tournament in Australia this past weekend, and a couple of weeks ago, your big race down there. I mean, those 2 races would be in the top 10 quality races I've seen all year, and I'm including the thoroughbred races I've watched this year. I mean, they were fantastic races.
And Clay, there's another thing. Trot's TV does it still exist, Steve? I know they cut it back.
No. Yeah. Look, it does the live vision, but it doesn't have the hosting of what it used to have. It just has some parade ring interviews, and that's it.
But Clay, when they had Trot's TV going full steam about 2 years ago, it was without a doubt the best live production of racing you've ever seen. You could sit there and you could watch every race over 5 hours, which you need to do down under because they race every 30 minutes. You're about ready to shoot yourself.
Right.
But it was an incredible production. There's a big market even for us going. It's reciprocal. We should be doing more internationally as well.
It was heartbreaking when they cut that. I worked as a host, co-host, and whatnot on Trot Vision for probably nearly 3 years, and I absolutely loved it. I used to do the pre-race interviews, do the form, your tipping and all that as well, but also help bring the knowledge of a trainer, driver, owner, breeder sort of thing to the viewers that they wouldn't get just from watching a few guys that are just there for the tipping side of thing. It sort of brought that other dimension to it, and I believe Trot Vision was one of our biggest selling points. And I know cost cutting has to happen, but when you're cutting back something that's actually promoting your business to drive income, you're almost like it's shooting yourself in the foot. So I know for one, I was shattered, not just because I'm no longer doing it, but I thought that it was one of our greatest assets that we unfortunately did just cut back to bare basics.
Yeah, we essentially need a TVG for harness racing.
Yes. But the problem is, I know John, when I speak to John, he always comes back to the same point, which is that it's almost impossible in this country to get the many differing segments of the industry to cooperate in anything. And when you talk about races with 12 or 14 horses, the drivers don't want it. When you talk about something else, there's always some segment that doesn't want something, and there's no unifying force to effectuate anything.
I agree with that, but I will say, going back to sort of a comment I made before, which we all agreed to, and I don't mean that they have the ideas or would be the thinkers, but once we involve the government in putting something together that is ultimately a win from their point of view in exchange for them continuing to provide us with significant money, we then have someone that actually does have the whip hand in terms of saying, guys, I know you drivers don't want to do it, but for us to continue doing this, it has to be more successful financially, and we've been convinced by people that that is one element of making it more successful financially. So tracks and horse people don't have a veto on it, they've got a voice, but ultimately, as in any other business, the people who are putting up the money ultimately make the call on the hard things at the end of the day, with a lot of education from the rest of us.
Yeah. Well, ultimately, the job of creating a business plan that makes sense and that can convince government and casinos that they can get what they want and leave a business that won't come back to them 3 years later, that's one of the most important things that one can do.
Yeah, and I'm going to make another comment here, just which I think is really quite important. To make this work for harness racing over the next 5 years, we have to have John Campbell be our leader in doing this because of his reputation, his integrity, the fact that everybody knows him. I'm just reflecting on the hockey series that just went on, internationally, and I know that having, I'll just take an example. That was a ceremonial role, but John's would be a substantive role. But having Mario Lemieux at the hockey game in Montreal meant way more than Mario Lemieux being at the hockey game in Montreal. It was investing the whole thing with the people that people respect the most. And so when it comes to compromises, in addition to the very financial oriented people that are part of compromises, you need somebody that everybody respects to be kind of the broker in making the thing go down. I'll just take this just a little example. It's for North Americans to watch, but I was watching it this morning. One of our sons had me watch it. There's a little clip that the NHL has done from a promotional point of view. The most interesting part of that, because we've all seen the games before, are the two coaches talking to their teams in the dressing room, between periods, but in particular prior to the overtime. And I guess that was just saying nobody has John's credibility with everybody like John has, and we need the business guys to have John there as part of being the honest broker and the guy that brings up the elements of our tradition that we need to be mindful of. But most importantly, have John being the guy who says on behalf of the guys that are actually involved in the industry, guys, we have to do this.
Yeah,
well, John,
Yeah.
it's all up to you now.
I appreciate the kind words, Clay, and all that, but and I'm not trying to be a pessimist here at all, but I just think back what had happened in Victoria, and I'm thinking if you brought a contingent over here from Victoria and explained exactly what happened there to the majority of our organizations that are entities that are control these money in the various states and provinces, it would just go in one ear and out, one out the other. And the daddy's credit card never running out is a great analogy. They don't think it will. And I don't know how you ever convince them that will happen.
I think that you're right, John. That's so important. But I guess I would say, not that I'm the voice that's going to say it or would have the credibility to say it, I would say based on all of my, 45 years in the business community doing deals and watching our industry, I know the credit card's going to disappear because it's so alluring to the governments to have the credit card disappear. And to put it bluntly, for all the incredible advantages of Kentucky, Kentucky's made it easy for the credit card to disappear everywhere else. And so we need our guys to understand that it'll be at a different rate. And that's a really hard thing to manage because, if you think you've got 8 years rather than 4, your view is a different one. But to help them understand that it is going to run out and we can't put ourselves in the Victoria position of looking for a solution after the game's over. But I know it's an unbelievably hard job. I mean, it just is an unbelievably hard job. I mean, in a crazy way, it's kind of the kind of thing you need the governments to threaten before people get the message. But I think about Ontario, where we were so lucky to get a 20-year deal, which is pretty incredible. I think the governments are going to live up to that. But I'll say no, not because anybody said to me. I know that the renewal of the deal isn't going to be the deal that we got 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I have to be honest. I cannot convince people of that in any way, shape, or form. There's a line in a Clint Eastwood Dirty Harry movie. A man's got to know his limitations, and I know mine in that regard.
And so, John, where would you say the most resistance is? I don't mean individuals, but what element of the business has the greatest resistance?
It'd be the state horsemen's association would be so there's no organization for racetracks,
right?
So that's where you'd run into resistance because horsemen, by and large, will trade racing dates for purses anytime. They historically have done it. And Maryland has actually changed their approach with their new reorganization, what everything is going on there. And there was a really positive article about that they are cutting dates, and the Horsemen's Association realizes that. But that's a unique stance for horsemen's organizations. They want racing dates, and
I know.
But John, what you're saying, you're saying you can't convince horsemen that the gravy train is going to end.
No,
but
I don't think anybody can. I don't think anybody can.
Well, if you think that, how can one possibly avoid a disastrous end? Because the gravy train will end. No business survives when it's losing money this way, and when it's owned by people who want its extinction. And the casinos know that with their money, that it's just a matter of time. Whether it's 4 years or 5 years or 8 years, they're going to get decoupling, and then the racing is going to be diminished, if not destroyed. What of that picture do horsemen not understand?
That it hasn't happened yet.
Just a question on that. With us, let's talk about Victoria here. We are covered by Harness Racing Victoria, and they put out an annual report every year. So we have it in black and white, and I've got just the last few years sitting right in front of me now that I can reel off. And we ran last year at a loss of $25.8 million. That was the Harness Racing Victoria's net profit loss. And then with government grants and everything else to cover that, to try and bring us back out in the black. So we have it in black and white. We're running at a $25 million loss. The previous year, $22 million loss. The prior year, $9 million loss, and so on and so on. So we have to believe it because we can see it in black and white. I'm not sure your states or tracks and that are set up. You obviously don't have stuff like this where it is in black and white to show exactly where the government's kicking in a certain amount of money that once it dries up, then all of a sudden we could run HRV with 0 staff and still run at a loss. It's showing that our business model at the moment is just not functionable without the government support. Surely your horsemen, if they saw reports like that, would have to open up their eyes and believe it.
Yeah, I guess so. I'd say that I agree with that rational people would do, but we're all hopers, But I mean, to me, the most telling part of all, but I also know, I mean, I write it all the time and I get very little reaction. You just need to look at the front page of the USTA racing page, which I look at every day for, entries or results, and it tells you where the wagering is this year relative to where it was last year. And there's been some weather this year, but in aggregate, the wagering is down 13.5% year to date. The number of dates is down 8%, so it's really 8%, but it was 7% last year. So in the last 2 years, we're on track to have lost 50% of our wagering, and if you project that out, you need only go another 5 years to, in effect, say our wagering is going to be half of what it was 2 years ago. And you just look at that and say, if you're wagering, even if you're not making any money on it, declines to that level, how do the governments not say, guys, we just, at best, we'll only cut you back percentage that your own business is going down, and you then look at that and in effect say, coming back to John's point, your only solution on your own at that point is to in effect say, we will agree to drastically slash dates to keep our base purse at a level that makes it worthwhile driving to the track. But I think we're all talking about a very, very difficult problem, which is how do you get John on it when he stopped me from being a Pollyanna in terms of saying how do you actually convince people that it is going to run out if we don't change, and don't wait till you're looking over the cliff, because it's going to be hard for you to decide to become a medical doctor at that point.
But you know what happens?
It's a worldwide problem because our turnover is down 14.9% for last year. So we're on the same levels as you.
Yeah.
But I think, Steve, and this could maybe get Robert into it also for New Zealand, but it seems to me that the problem is the same everywhere in that the truth and the effect, and I guess the cause of this problem of the diminishing wagering and the decline of racing is not a story that people in the industry are hearing every day from those that are leading the industry. You just had a sale in New Zealand that got promoted as a tremendous sale, and it had the highest sale topper in New Zealand history. But if you had a lower level or mid-level horse, you got crucified. Yeah. And you also had in a country that it's unlikely you could have more than $300,000 or $400,000 winners in New Zealand for a 2-year-old, for example. They had, Robert, you would know exactly, but they probably had 30 horses sell for $100,000. There's no awareness, no conscious awareness of the cliff, and you're just not having anybody point out the reality that you have to make a drastic change to come up with a program that has any potential. And people don't hear that enough. Yeah,
part of the explanation for that is because that's true everywhere. I mean, there still will be, for quite a period of time, enough guys with enough money to buy the best horses, or what they think are the best 100%. Horses. But that doesn't solve the overall problem for the industry. I mean, yes, it solves the problem or it mitigates the problem for the very top end breeders. It's tough on the lower end breeders, but it doesn't solve the problem of, which I think is the ultimate problem, which is between the casinos, but more importantly, the government saying, unless you guys can give us a credible plan, we have to cut back. And when you cry, our answer is, well, go race in Kentucky. That seems to be a good place for you.
Yeah. What do you have to say, Robert, about New Zealand after you've heard all the points about North America and Australia?
Well, I think, gentlemen, we're a little bit different than all these other jurisdictions. I mean, to be fair, our totalizer turnover this year currently is tracking ahead of last year, which I think tracked ahead of the previous year, only probably in that 3 to 4%, but it is positive. Obviously, for us, the major change, positive change, was the taking over of our TAB, Totalizer Agency Board, 50% by Entain / Ladbrokes, and they've reinvigorated the whole betting environment in New Zealand, and that's led to increased revenue into the industry. So from our point of view, and the deal we have is just a year and a half into a 5-year deal. So, I mean, our stakes went up, I think, another 10 million last year, and will probably go up a little bit more than that this year. So all of that is incredibly positive. I mean, we're a country of 5.5 million, and the South Island has a population of 1.5 million, and probably more than 50% of all our racing product is in the South Island. And a little bit like Australia, we've been brought up on a culture of rugby, racing and beer. So in New Zealand, I mean, racing is quite, maybe not so much in the younger generation, but certainly in the middle-aged and older generation, racing is it's just part of your DNA. Our real problem is the fact that our industry has been run by our clubs, and really, in terms of that, we've been going backwards. We've got some really good assets and racetracks, but they're run by clubs which are really amateur at the best, and we've just had a big change in our governance at HRNZ, and our real worry is that from an administration point of view, we don't get our act together in terms of how we run our assets that are our tracks and the entertainment product. So on one half, we're in a very positive space. Another half, we just, and it's our own fault. It's nobody else's fault. And to that point, our latest breeding season, we'll see our numbers drop by about 20%. So it's quite, it's an enigma in a way, and in terms of so much positivity, but down in the grassroots, we just seem to be losing our core people. We're like we've got an aeroplane where business class and first class are full, but economy class is empty.
What did Entain do to make it so much better?
I mean, it's easy when you take over from someone who was not very good, and our previous TAB was semi-government run operation. Yeah. This is a private run, well operated here. They know how to market, they know the product, and they're a business. Yeah.
Well, and that's why we need some business people involved, because you're right, that always makes things better. But again, if we could we should do the same with the idea of putting our best assets and stakes together, and then agreeing on a wagering operator or professional organization that, as far as their involvement in our business, is totally committed to maximizing the financial returns of the business.
Yeah, I think everybody agrees with that. Getting it done is the problem.
Yeah. Well, no, we have to get everyone together first, right?
Yeah.
I guess, can I just add one thing? When I listen to you gentlemen talk about, the states particularly, and that so much of it seems to be an external problem regarding casinos or government departments. In New Zealand, we don't have that problem. Our problems, lucky for us, are all internal. Is we're sitting on something that can go forward and is going forward. We just don't have the right people in the bridge of the ship to make sure we take it to where it needs to go. So it's an internal issue.
Yeah, in that regard, you're quite lucky.
Oh, very much so. We've just got to stage a mutiny and get rid of the captain and the crew.
All right, gentlemen, we are moving to the 1 hour point. So we'll just wrap it up in 5 minutes. Does that sound good?
Absolutely. On my behalf, I just wanted to thank everybody, especially I know Clay it was very busy in Canada, John also, and I think hopefully that what everybody's been saying will get heard by the industry, and that perhaps one could find a way to achieve what Clay is pushing for. It requires the right people and the right spirit, and it is the right solution if it can be achieved. But again, thank you to John, to Clay, to Steve, and to Robert, and to you, Freddie, for putting it together. And perhaps there could be some follow-up later, but it's a nice start.
The one thing that I'm going to add is I've never seen a business plan done for our sport. Maybe we should get together and start working on a business plan for the whole sport. John, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that would be a really good start. And I really agree with everything that Clay has said about the future and certainly how precarious our situation is. But boy, it's tough to get everybody on the same page. It's even tough to get everybody to acknowledge that this isn't going to last forever. And, you know, that therein lies the problem.
Although what Clay is saying and what I'm trying to suggest too, I think Clay and I are sort of on the same path, is if you do come up with a good plan and you do structure for the long term, that the long term can be there. But you need independence, you need control of the product, you need a good product, and you need unity of mass so you can control your own destiny.
Can I just add one thing? In 2026, next year, the World Trotting Organisation is going to be at their conferences in New Zealand. It seems in previous ones it's been just a junket for everyone. Why can't something like that be the basis for going forward?
You bring up a great point. I was actually at the World Trotting Conference in Germany, the last one they had, and spoke there. I think that is the most underutilized organization in the world for harness racing. They've got the leaders from the United States, Canada, down under, Europe, and all of them put on great events, and to have them not sharing that information of what works, what doesn't work, I couldn't agree more that organization, they have to follow through more in between meetings than what they do. That's part of the problem. They meet every 3 years and then it just falls through the cracks and nothing really gets followed through. But I just think that's an organization that could really move harness racing forward, in the future. But again, I'm not involved with it, but I would like to see them take a more active role.
Okay.
Just before I sign off, to throw towards John's point about getting people to understand, I think you guys maybe need to use Victoria as a little bit of a proving point to your people, is that we were one of the best states, one of the biggest states when it comes to the racing and sort of, probably equal number one or always number one for a long, long time. And we are now the bottom dwellers of Australian racing. There's no ifs or buts about that. We are really well below the other major states. And if they don't think it can happen, just point them towards us. They'll say it can happen, and it has happened here. And we are a long way out of trying to dig out of this hole. We're not going to see much change in the next 3 to 5 years before we start seeing a little bit of daylight.
With that, I'm going to close the show out.
Not yet. Since nobody has asked the ancient handicapper, what do you want? Basically, what I would want is pickable winners. I want a race where I can handicap the race, and I know everybody in there is going all out. Or if they're not, I know why they're not. Because, he's prepping for this or prepping for that. You're asking me to bet my money. Well, if you want me to do that, you got to give me a good reason to do it. Years back, we had good reasons. Unfortunately, there's so much else going on for the competition of the wagering dollar, especially with sports wagering. All you have to do is listen to any radio station, and all they're talking about is, well, you can bet this, you can bet that, DraftKings, FanDuel, etc. No, we need bettable racing. Don't give me 15 horses in a goddamn race, because I wouldn't even think about looking at it. I can't even begin to figure out, well, who might be first, who might be second at the first quarter. I want pickable winners, sensible races, 10 horses on a big track, 8 horses on a small track, that's fine. Okay.
Okay, with that, I'm going to close the show out. Gordon, I want to thank you for bringing everyone together. I personally thank John for joining us, Clay, Robert, and Steve, and Bob. I think we all did a great job here, and we can take it from there.
It was fun, guys.
Thanks. It was fun.
Look forward to doing it again.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Now, over to Andy.
Thanks, Fred. I don't know what I'm going to be writing about for next Monday's Keeping Pace column, but I'm working with Pollock Report on a story about the new standardbred training facility in Versailles, Kentucky. That's going to be a story coming out in the next couple of days that I think folks are going to be interested in. I hope everybody reads it. I hope everybody reads the column we posted this week at Keeping Pace on that big Pennsylvania scandal involving the corticosteroids. Back to you, Fred. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. That's a wrap for this week's show. Thanks for listening, and please join us again next week.
The Harness Racing Alumni Show